Okay, let's dive right in. We're starting today with something that looks like a simple corporate move on the surface, but our sources suggest it's got much deeper geo-economic ripples. We're talking about those 300-plus Chinese engineers leaving Foxconn's iPhone 17 facility in India. It might seem like just, a logistical thing, but the analysis, it points to something far more deliberate, a strategic chess move, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. What's really striking here isn't just that staff are moving. The sources are calling it a meticulously planned strategy, a subtle but pretty powerful maneuver by Beijing. And the why seems pretty clear. It looks like an attempt to slow down India's manufacturing ambitions, and by doing that, maintain what some call a unipolar Asia, basically, keeping Beijing firmly in the economic driver's seat. You see, these engineers, they have very specific crucial skills: setting up production lines, making things efficient, fixing complex problems, pulling them out. It's a direct hit to that knowledge transfer India really needs for its high-tech manufacturing goals.
Okay, so pulling engineers is one tactic. Are there other levers China might be using, maybe less obvious ones, like what about restrictions on materials or equipment?
Oh, absolutely. China's been using its dominance in rare earth production quite strategically. We're seeing restrictions, sometimes informal, on exporting stuff like gallium, germanium, graphite, and rare earth magnets, too. All absolutely vital for EVs, electronics, defense tech, you name it. And it goes beyond just rare earths. There are curbs on other minerals, and maybe more subtly, these kind of informal blocks on capital equipment. Think high-end manufacturing machines, heavy-duty boring equipment, even solar gear. And the way they do it is clever, often not formal bans. It's more like verbal instructions, administrative holdups, really hard to challenge legally, but very effective at disrupting things. Creates huge uncertainty for Indian manufacturers. It all feels like a way to limit tech transfer, keep India reliant, stop it building its own high-value manufacturing base.
Quite a strategy. Given this forceful protection of its manufacturing dominance, what does that signal about China's own internal situation? Why this intense focus on keeping that economic edge?
That's a really important question because China is facing some pretty big domestic challenges right now. You've got an aging, even shrinking population. That's the legacy of the one-child policy kicking in. Plus, a lot of wealth has been hit by this ongoing property crisis. It's still causing problems. And there's this structural imbalance. Too much production capacity, but not enough people buying things domestically. So what does that mean? It means China has to rely heavily on exports to bring in revenue. That trade surplus, nearly $1 trillion now, is massive. And that money, it's essential for funding social welfare, pensions, internal security, the military, all of it. So if those export revenues dropped, that would directly impact Beijing's ability to pay for these things, could cause real social instability. So China isn't just playing defense here, it's using every tool from pulling engineers to, frankly, weaponizing its overcapacity. Look at BYD in the EV market aggressive pricing to suppress competitors and grab market share. It's almost like they're trying to export their internal economic pressures. Manufacturing is like a safety valve.
Okay, so that's China's play. What about India's position on the board? How is its manufacturing ecosystem looking in all this?
Well, India certainly has big ambitions. Make in India is all about becoming a global manufacturing player. But realistically, the ecosystem is still pretty nascent. It's growing, but it's early days. There are still persistent infrastructure gaps, reliable power, smooth logistics, good transport links. These things really matter. And bureaucratic red tape, that's still a common complaint. Plus, India still relies heavily on imports for key components. We're talking sophisticated chips, engines, semiconductor sensors, even for basic assembly, what they call screwdriver technology, where you just put imported parts together, often needs outside help. So Make in India is ambitious, yes, but it still needs a lot of external support and, frankly, more foundational work. And then there's this other layer our sources point out, the U.S. raising tariffs on some Indian goods to 50%, while China, even though it's buying more Russian oil and gas than India, gets a 90-day exemption on something else. It definitely raises questions about, strategic autonomy and how India navigates these global partnerships. Ultimately, the pressure is really on India to build up its own foundations if it wants to compete seriously.
Right. Okay, shifting from that geoeconomic chessboard to a very different and frankly quite sobering topic, the Indian criminal justice system. There's been a real shockwave after the Bombay High Court exonerated everyone convicted in the 2006 Mumbai train blasts, 19 years after those horrific attacks. 189 killed, hundreds injured. And now this, overturning the 2015 trial court's verdict of death and life sentences.
It's jarring, absolutely. And the reasons the High Court gave are what's truly stunning. They didn't just question the original investigation. The reports say they effectively ripped it apart. Witnesses, called untrustworthy, confessions, ruled as being under duress, identification parades, deemed faulty. And maybe the most fundamental point, the chain of custody for forensic evidence was not foolproof. Think about that. These are the pillars the trial court used for convictions, including death sentences, and the High Court found them fundamentally flawed.
So obviously devastating for the individuals involved. But looking bigger picture, what does this whole saga, especially those scathing court findings, reveal about the cracks in the system? Where does the accountability lie here? With the police? The courts?
It really throws a harsh light on the intense pressure investigating teams face in these huge, high-profile cases. Often, governments facing public outcry and political pressure demand quick results, quick arrests. And that pressure, unfortunately, can lead officers to cut corners, bypass protocols, make hasty decisions. The court's review found some really specific, troubling examples, like confessions taken by two different senior police officers. They weren't just similar, they were reportedly identical, down to the punctuation. That screams potential duress. Then you had witnesses whose stories apparently changed or fell apart years later under cross-examination, became untrustworthy, and the forensic evidence issue. The court saying its purity in custody cannot be vouched for faithfully. I mean, that's foundational. If you can't trust the evidence, what's left of the case?
And amidst all this, there's this really interesting, almost ironic element involving the Right to Information Act, the RTI.
Yes, the sources really highlight this. It seems the accused and their defense lawyers filed hundreds of RTIs. They used the act to get information from police, hospitals, phone companies, all sorts of agencies. And then they use that information strategically in court. To build their defense, yes, but also to directly challenge prosecution witnesses, like proving someone a witness mentioned in a hospital record didn't actually exist, or showing witness statements about shift timings were wrong. It's being called the noblest use of RTI, using transparency laws to defend yourself, which is a fundamental right under Article 23 of the Constitution. It shows how powerful those tools can be for citizens, even those accused of terrible crimes.
Wow. But then there was another layer of complexity, something quite embarrassing for the Mumbai police that came out later.
Exactly. In 2008, so 2 years after the blasts, the Mumbai crime branch busted a module of a group called Indian Mujahideen, or IM, and members of this module reportedly claimed responsibility for the 711 train blasts. This was after the anti-terrorist squad, the ATS, had already charged members of a different group, SIMI. So you have this massive confusion. For the victims' families, there's still no definitive closure. Who is truly responsible? And for the accused spending 19 years incarcerated only to be exonerated, it's a profound injustice. 19 years without proven guilt.
19 years. It's just staggering. The sources called this delay meaningless and warned of a time bomb of frustration.
Yeah.
How starkly does this case highlight the need for deep systemic reform, not just minor fixes?
It's a massive alarm bell, isn't it? 19 years for a final decision. It makes a mockery of timely justice. It is meaningless in that context. The entire criminal justice system, from investigation to prosecution to the judiciary itself, needs a complete overhaul. Needs to be put on track on a war footing, as one source puts it. It's not just about tweaking old laws. It needs fundamental reform of the police, the courts, the prosecutors, even the prisons. And it can't wait. That phrase, "we are sitting on a time bomb of people's expectations and frustrations," feels incredibly apt. Public trust hinges on a system that delivers fair, credible, and timely justice.
Okay, let's move now to a really fascinating intersection of law, ethics, and religion. This is prompted by the case of Nimisha Priya, the Malayali nurse imprisoned in Yemen for murder. Her situation really puts a spotlight on the complexities of retributive justice in some Muslim countries. Our sources note the appeal court left a door open for clemency through blood money daya under Sharia law.
Right, and this case brings up a really important distinction within Islamic law itself. Daya is indeed mentioned in the Quran, specifically in verse 4.92, as compensation, usually for accidental killing. Now, for intentional murder or violent assault, the Quran does outline qisas, which is retribution or retaliation. It acts as a deterrent. However, the key argument presented in our sources is that many of the Quran's original injunctions, particularly around homicide and assault, were fundamentally restorative in their aim, not purely retributive like they're sometimes interpreted today.
That's a really interesting point. Restorative, not just retributive. How does that compare to, say, earlier legal codes from ancient times?
Well, the contrast is quite striking. If you look at pre-Islamic legal systems, like the Hebrew Bible or codes from Sumeria or Babylonia, they strongly upheld capital punishment and lex talionis, an eye for an eye, retaliation in kind. One source even mentions a Hittite edict, where the victim's heir had the sole power to decide the offender's fate, kill or spare, no middle ground like compensation. The Quran, however, introduced what our sources call a reformative switch. In verse 2.178, it specifically invites the victim's heirs to pardon the killer. And in return for that pardon, they receive fair compensation. This isn't just about money changing hands. It's designed to foster remorse in the offender, yes, but also social harmony and dignity for everyone involved. It's a shift towards healing, both individual and communal. Quran 5.45 really emphasizes this, calling forgiveness an act atonement kafara for the one forgiving. It elevates mercy.
So it ties into a wider ethical principle within Islam.
Exactly. There's another verse, 64.12, which says, God is merciful to those who pardon, overlook, and forgive. And this is echoed strongly by the Prophet's teachings, encouraging mercy on earth to receive mercy from heaven. Compassion is central.
Okay, so if we apply this understanding, what could it mean for Nimisha Priya's specific situation?
Well, it could have very serious implications. If, as reports suggest, she didn't intend to kill Mahdi if it was an accidental overdose while trying to sedate him, perhaps to retrieve her passport he'd allegedly taken. Then, under the Quranic principle in 4.92 dealing with accidental killing, his family arguably wouldn't have the right to demand the death penalty. Diya, compensation, would be the path. There are also these background allegations about Mahdi's own prior conduct, which might challenge the narrative of him being purely an innocent victim. So for justice to align with that Quranic spirit of restoration and nuance, these specific circumstances really need to be considered carefully.
That brings up a really critical question then. Why does the application of justice in many Muslim societies today sometimes seem to diverge from these core Quranic ideas of restoration and mercy?
That's a complex issue, but sources point towards the dominance of what's called sectarian jurisprudence. This often involves viewing Islam less as a broad, rational, justice-focused ethical framework, the deen, and more as a set of rigid, dogmatic rules defined by specific schools of thought or mazhab. These schools often rely heavily on interpretations established centuries ago, sometimes by male authorities. Historically, there was this kind of structural transformation, as sources put it. Post-prophetic schools of thought emerged and sometimes formed alliances with ruling elites. Rulers got religious backing for their power, and theologians got space to impose certain structures, sometimes patriarchal ones. This whole process could have shifted the focus away from the Quran's original intent, sometimes making Islam appear harsher or more rigid than its core texts suggest. The call from these sources is really for theologians today to let the merciful deen of Islam prevail over their rigid juristic schools, to rediscover that emphasis on compassion and holistic justice.
Okay, changing lanes completely now into the elegant world of mathematics, where breakthroughs can feel almost like poetry. We're talking about Rajula Srivastava, who just won the Maryam Mirzakhani New Frontiers Prize. And I love the story. She initially thought the congratulatory email from Terence Towle, a Fields medalist, was a scam.
Yes, it's a great anecdote. Shows how unexpected these things can be. So Srivastava is now a Herzebruch research instructor in Germany. She grew up in India in a family that loves science, and she decided she wanted to be a mathematician around age 15. Why? Partly because she loved puzzles, but also because she disliked memorization and wasn't keen on lab work. Math seemed like the perfect fit.
Her field is harmonic analysis. Can you sort of break that down for us? And what's this connection people make to music?
Sure. At its core, harmonic analysis is about studying functions by breaking them down into simpler pieces, specifically their frequencies. Think of how a prism splits light into colors, or how sound engineers use Fourier transforms to isolate different notes or frequencies in music. It's about finding the underlying waves or vibrations. Srivastava works mostly with waves in 3 or even higher dimensions. And when you get into these higher dimensions, it gets really interesting because it connects strongly with geometry, with the patterns and shapes these waves form. You're basically analyzing the fundamental structure of complex signals or phenomena.
Waves and shapes. Fascinating. But then she took this abstract field and merged it with number theory. How did that happen?
Yeah, apparently after her PhD, she just got curious. She started looking into these things called counting problems that sit right at the intersection of harmonic analysis and number theory. She uses a simple example. Think about trying to approximate irrational numbers, like pi, using fractions on a number line. How close can you get? Now imagine doing that in higher dimensions. Instead of a line, maybe you have a complex 3D shape, like a sphere. And instead of fractions, you're using points from a regular grid, a lattice. Her work looks at how closely the points on that grid can approximate points on the surface of the shape. This is where the geometry really comes in. And the tools from harmonic analysis, dealing with the periodicity of waves, mesh really well with the regular periodic nature of these lattices. It helps you count points on the shape in a very elegant way.
That sounds incredibly complex. So thinking about her journey, what does her success tell us about the wider world of mathematics, maybe particularly for women in STEM?
That's a really significant aspect. She mentioned feeling no real barriers during her studies in India, which is great. But when she went abroad, she did experience a sense of alienation sometimes as a non-white woman, feeling like she had to prove herself more or was scrutinized more, especially if she asked questions. She does feel things are getting better with more women of color entering the field now. And she expressed a real desire for more major conferences to be held in developing countries, not just the usual spots, spreading the opportunity. She also made a point of saying how grateful she was for her education in India, the scholarships and low fees that made it possible. Her success is definitely inspiring, but it also highlights those ongoing challenges that still exist.
And finally, how does she view the act of doing mathematics itself? Her perspective sounds quite unique.
Yeah, she describes it beautifully. When she's deep in a problem, it's almost like meditation. She sees math as a cross between art and science, which is a lovely way to put it. For her, the satisfaction comes from the small victories, like figuring out a small part of a larger proof, that moment of creation. She also loves the independence of it. You don't need expensive labs or equipment, just, as she says, pen and paper or a board and chalk. And she finishes with this powerful analogy. In some ways, it's like writing a story or a poem. I like the fact that you can create something which lasts in that way. It really captures the enduring beauty she finds in it.
From pure thought to practical solutions. Let's shift now to something with huge potential for India's climate targets.
Yeah.
Biochar. Our sources are really highlighting this as a key CO2 removal technology, especially with the Indian carbon market coming online in 2026. So just quickly, it's basically a special charcoal made from agricultural waste and organic city waste, right?
Exactly. And the potential in India is just enormous. We're talking over 600 million metric tons of agricultural residue every year, plus another 60 million tons of organic municipal solid waste. Right now, sadly, a lot of that gets burned in the open or dumped in landfills, huge source of pollution and greenhouse gases. But if India could process just, say, 30 to 50% of that surplus waste into biochar, that could produce maybe 15 to 26 million tons of biochar annually. And the carbon removal impact, around zero point 0.1 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year, that's a significant chunk of national emissions just from managing waste better.
Okay, so it locks up carbon. But the process itself yields other useful things too, doesn't it? What about the byproducts? Energy potential.
That's right, it's not just about the char. Making biochar also produces syngas, maybe 20 to 30 million tons a year from that waste potential. And bio-oil, maybe 24 to 40 million tons. The syngas could generate a decent amount of electricity, potentially offsetting some coal power, maybe 0.5 to 0.7% of India's annual electricity needs. And the bio-oil, that could replace a significant chunk of diesel or kerosene, maybe 8% of production. That means fewer crude oil imports and cutting fossil fuel emissions by over 2%. It tackles waste and energy.
Right, it's hitting multiple problems. And what's really interesting is how biochar works as a long-term carbon sink in different areas. How does it do that, say, in farming or construction?
Well, the key is that biochar is incredibly stable. Carbon locked up in it can stay put in the soil for hundreds, even up to 1,000 years. It doesn't easily break down. And its uses are really broad. In agriculture, it's great for holding water in the soil, especially important in drier regions of India. It also significantly cuts down nitrous oxide, N2O, emissions from soil by 30 to 50%. And N2O is a really potent greenhouse gas, like 273 times worse than CO2. Plus, it boosts soil organic carbon, which is just good for soil health overall. Then in construction, you can add a small amount, maybe 2–5% to concrete. It actually improves strength, makes it more heat resistant, and it locks up carbon right there in the building material, about 115 kilograms of CO2 per cubic meter. And wastewater treatment. India has billions of liters of untreated wastewater daily. Biochar is a cheap, effective option. 1 kilo can treat hundreds of liters.
Okay, the potential seems massive.
Yes.
So what's stopping it from becoming a widespread reality in India right now? What are the main hurdles?
Yeah, that's the crucial question. Despite all this promise, biochar isn't really getting the recognition it deserves, especially in carbon credit markets. A big part of that is the lack of standardized markets for their raw materials and the feedstocks, and inconsistent ways of measuring the carbon stored. That makes investors nervous, you know? Then there are other challenges: limited resources for deployment, the technology is still evolving, market uncertainties, plus not enough clear, supportive government policy yet. We need viable business models for doing this at scale. There's also just limited awareness among farmers or builders, and weak systems for monitoring, reporting, and verifying the carbon removal. Oh, and coordinating between different sectors: agriculture, energy, climate that needs work too. It's a whole web of things.
So, overcoming those hurdles, how can India really push for large-scale adoption?
It really needs a coordinated push on several fronts. First, sustained R&D, figuring out the best feedstocks for different regions, optimizing the process. Then, systematically integrating biochar into existing government programs. Things like crop residue management schemes, bioenergy initiatives, state climate plans make it part of the official toolkit. And crucially, getting biochar properly recognized as a verifiable way to remove carbon in that upcoming Indian carbon market. That creates a real economic incentive. Farmers and investors can earn carbon credits. Sources even estimate village-level production could create over 500,000 rural jobs. Add in the other benefits: healthier soil, less need for fertilizer, potentially higher crop yields. Look, biochar isn't a magic bullet, right? Nothing is. But it offers a solid, science-backed way for India to tackle climate goals, development goals, waste management, and support rural livelihoods all at once.
Okay, for our final segment today, we're looking at Taiwan's political scene, which has seen some recent turbulence. Specifically, this July 26 recall vote targeting 24 lawmakers from the opposition Kuomintang, the KMT. The big news was that all 24 actually kept their seats in this first round, though there's another round scheduled for late August.
Yes, this great recall vote, as it's being called, is pretty significant. It was pushed by a civic group, the Bluebird Movement, and had backing from the ruling party, the DPP. The accusations against the KMT lawmakers were pretty heavy: being too close to China, threatening national security, blocking the DPP's agenda, and ramming through controversial laws without proper procedure. It was a major challenge to their authority.
So when did this movement really kick off, and what was the trigger that led to this large-scale recall attempt?
It really gained momentum in 2024, started with local protests. But the context is key. Taiwan has a divided government right now. After the 2024 elections, the DPP won the presidency, but they lost their majority in the legislature. The KMT leads an opposition coalition that now holds the majority there. So the opposition can block DPP bills, leading to gridlock. What really seemed to ignite the big protests, over 100,000 people in May, was the way the KMT-led opposition pushed through some controversial bills. Critics said they rushed them, undermined the power of the courts and the executive branch, and basically ignored normal parliamentary debate. That was seen as bypassing democratic processes.
Right, that sounds like a major flashpoint.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about the actual recall mechanism, this Taiwan Public Officials Election and Recall Act? How does it work? Is it used often?
It's actually a rarely used constitutional tool designed to let citizens remove elected officials, but it has quite high thresholds, making it hard to succeed. There are 3 stages. First, you need a petition signed by just 1% of the voters in the official's district. Then, stage 2 requires signatures from 10% of the electorate. That's a bigger hurdle. And the final stage, the actual recall vote, needs 2 things. First, at least 25% of all eligible voters in the district have to vote yes to recall. And second, the number of yes votes must be higher than the no votes. In this first round in July, the organizers simply didn't hit that crucial 25% threshold in any of the 24 districts. That's why the KMT lawmakers survived. It shows how high that bar is set.
Okay, so the KMT lawmakers survived this round. What does this outcome mean for Taiwan's political climate, which already sounds pretty divided? Has this whole process maybe polarized things even further?
That seems to be the key takeaway, yes. The recall vote, which is meant to be this tool for citizen empowerment and accountability, might have actually backfired here. The sources suggest it has ended up further polarizing the parties and their supporters, deepening the divides. The KMT surviving has led to questions about whether the recall attempt was really necessary or if it was more of a political tactic by the DPP. And now the KMT is feeling emboldened, even calling for a cabinet reshuffle, taking a more assertive stance. It really highlights this tricky situation in a divided government. How do you ensure accountability without just making the political fractures even deeper? Sometimes these democratic tools can end up exacerbating the divisions they're meant to help resolve.
Thank you for listening. If today's deep dives gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. Apologies if you couldn't reach out earlier. The message inbox was restricted. You should be able to now. As always, we are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.